The old man had seen many things in his long life. He had seen floods wash away bridges that took 3 years to build. He had seen droughts turn green fields into pale dust. He had seen men argue over nothing and women cry over everything. But he had never seen anything quite like what happened in the square on that cold Tuesday morning. His name was Aldous. He was 71 years old, and he sat on the same wooden bench every morning with a cup of tea that was always too hot to drink right away. He liked that bench because it gave him a clear view of the whole square, the baker's shop on the left, the well in the middle, and the open space where people gathered when something was happening. Something was always happening in Greyvale. But this was different. She was standing in the center of the square again. Maura. She was tall, taller than most of the men in the village, with broad shoulders and skin the color of old bronze touched with green. Her dark hair was braided and wound up on her head like a crown she had made herself. Her arms were crossed over her chest, and her jaw was set in the way Aldous had come to recognize over the past 3 months. It was the jaw of someone who had already decided how the morning was going to go. "Same rules," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Any man who can beat me in a fair test of strength, I will marry him. That is my word. That has always been my word." The crowd that had gathered was the usual mix. Some people came because they were genuinely curious. Some came because they had nothing better to do. And some, Aldous knew this, even if nobody said it out loud, came because watching Maura embarrass another challenger had become a kind of morning entertainment in Greyvale. That bothered him. It had bothered him for weeks. He remembered the first time she had made the declaration. It was 3 months ago, on a cold morning much like this one. He had been sitting on the same bench, drinking the same tea, when he heard her voice ring out across the square. He had not understood it at first. He had thought it was strange, a young woman, standing in public, offering herself as a prize to whoever could overpower her. But then, 2 days later, he had heard something that explained everything. He had been passing the alehouse in the late afternoon when he heard laughter from inside. Loud laughter, the kind that means someone is being laughed at rather than laughed with. He had stopped without meaning to, and he had heard one of the young men inside say, clearly, without any care for who might be listening, that no man in his right mind would ever want Maura. That she was too big. Too rough. Too much of what she was and not enough of what she should be. More laughter. Then the sound of cups being refilled. Aldous had stood very still on the street outside. And then he had walked home slowly, and he had thought about what it must be like to be Maura, to walk through a village every day knowing that people were saying those things. Knowing that they believed them. He understood her declaration after that. If no man could beat her, no man would ever have to choose her. And if no man ever had to choose her, she would never have to stand in front of someone and watch his face at the moment he decided she was not worth the trouble. The declaration was not pride. It was armor. She had built a wall out of the one thing she had, her strength, and she was standing behind it where nobody could reach her. It was very clever. It was also very sad. The challenger this morning was a young farmer named Dav. He was broad and loud, and he had told everyone in the alehouse the night before that he was going to be the one to finally beat her. He walked into the square with his friends behind him and his chest pushed forward and his chin up, and he looked exactly like every other young man who had stood in front of Maura and underestimated her. The test was simple. It was always the same. 2 hands gripped around an iron bar, the first person to release it lost. No tricks. No rules beyond that. Dav lasted 40 seconds. He let go with a grunt and a shake of his hands, and his friends went very quiet, and the crowd murmured and shifted, and Maura did not smile or gloat. She never did. She simply lowered the bar and waited to see if anyone else would step forward. Nobody did. And that was when Aldous heard a voice say, quietly but clearly, "I'll try, if you'll allow it." He turned. He had seen this man before, but only in the way you see someone you have not yet had a reason to notice. He had moved to Greyvale about 4 months ago to take over the carpentry shop that had belonged to his late uncle. He was not tall. He was not broad. He had lean arms and hands that were rough from years of working with wooden tools, and he was sitting on the edge of a cart near the far side of the square. He was looking at Maura with an expression that Aldous could not immediately name. His name, Aldous would later learn, was Cale. He was standing now, not because he had jumped up dramatically, but because he had simply gotten to his feet, the way a person stands when they have made a quiet decision and are ready to follow through on it. Mora turned to look at him. The crowd turned to look at him. Someone laughed, low and short, the way people laugh when something seems too small to be taken seriously. Mora did not laugh. She looked at him the way she had not looked at most challengers, not as a problem to be solved or an annoyance to be dealt with, but as a person she had not yet decided anything about. She said, "You know you will likely lose." He said, "Yes. But I'd like to try anyway." A beat of silence. Then Mora nodded and held out the bar. Cale walked forward. He did not look at the crowd. He did not say anything to the people watching. He simply stepped up, wrapped both hands around the iron bar, and looked at Mora. She looked back at him. "Ready," she said. "Yes," he said. They gripped. Within 15 seconds, Cale's arms were shaking. Aldous could see it from where he sat, that fine, constant trembling that comes when muscles are being pushed past what they are used to. The crowd saw it too. The laughter came again, a little louder this time, from somewhere near the baker's shop. But Cale did not let go. His face had gone tight with effort. The cords in his neck stood out. His knuckles had turned white around the bar. He was clearly in real discomfort, not pretending, not performing for anyone. He was simply enduring it. 1 second at a time, 1 breath at a time, he held on. Mora's hands did not shake. They never did. She had the kind of grip that came from years of hard work and something beyond that, something that was simply part of who she was. She could have ended this quickly. She almost did, 3 times. Her fingers shifted slightly, ready to apply the final pressure that would break his hold. But she stopped each time. Because she had begun to watch his face. She could not have explained, afterward, exactly what she was looking at. It was not his pain, though she could see that clearly enough. It was something under the pain. Something that refused to fold. She had watched men give up in this square over and over again, and when they gave up, there was always a kind of relief that passed across their faces, as if letting go was the easy thing they had been waiting for permission to do. This man's face had none of that relief in it. He was not waiting for an excuse to stop. He was looking for a reason to keep going. After a long, strange minute, longer than anyone in the crowd had expected, Mora heard herself speak. She kept her voice low, low enough that only he could hear her above the noise of the square. "Why are you still holding on?" He was quiet for 2 full seconds. Then, without loosening his grip at all, he said, "Because giving up feels like agreeing with everyone who already decided I couldn't." Mora went very still. Not her hands maintained the same steady pressure. But everything else about her, her shoulders, her breathing, the place behind her eyes where she had been keeping everything very carefully locked away, went still in a way that had nothing to do with the iron bar in her hands. Because she knew that feeling. She knew it exactly. She had been living inside that feeling for as long as she could remember, and she had built her entire declaration around it, and she had never once heard someone else say it out loud. She held on for another 30 seconds. Then she released the bar. The crowd erupted. There was cheering and arguing and confusion all at once, some people saying it did not count, some saying she had given up, some saying she had never given up before. What did it mean? What were the rules? Dav and his friends were loudest of all, saying something about it not being a real loss if she let go on purpose. Mora turned to face the crowd. Her voice was calm and even. "He held longer than any other man who has stood here. I set the rules. I decide what counts." Nobody argued further. Not out loud. Aldous watched Cale flex his hand slowly, opening and closing his fingers with the careful attention of someone checking whether something is still working properly. He winced once, then stopped wincing, and stood quietly while the crowd moved and shifted and eventually broke apart into smaller groups heading off toward their own mornings. And then Mora walked toward him. Aldous had never seen her walk toward a challenger after a test. She always stepped back. She always let them leave first. But now she crossed the square in a straight line and stopped in front of Cale, and she looked at his hand, and she said, "Is it all right?" He looked slightly surprised. "It will be fine in a day or 2. A short silence fell between them. Not uncomfortable, exactly. More like the silence of two people who are both aware that something has changed but neither of them is quite sure how to describe it yet. Then Maura said, "Why did you actually do that?" He thought about it. She could see him thinking, not scrambling for the right answer, but actually considering. Then he said, "I've been sitting on that cart for 3 weeks." She waited. "I've watched men come up here like this is a game," he said. "Like you're something to beat, not someone to talk to. And it bothered me." He paused. "I don't know if what I did was the right thing. But I couldn't keep sitting still." Maura looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that a less steady person might have looked away. She did not ask her next question lightly. She had never asked it before. "Are you saying you actually want to know me?" He met her eyes without flinching. "I've wanted to talk to you since I got here. I just didn't know how to start." Aldous, watching from his bench, set down his tea. He had finally remembered to drink it. It had gone cold. He watched Maura's face. It was a face that had been holding something very heavy for a very long time, and he could see, just barely, just at the edges, a change happening. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that the crowd, had they still been watching, would have noticed or remarked on. It was the change that happens in a person's face when they have been braced for a blow that does not come. She looked, for just a moment, uncertain. Not weak, uncertain. As if she had arrived at the edge of something she had not planned for, and she was deciding whether to take the next step. Then she said, "I'm going to the forge to pick up a tool." He said, "That sounds like a fine direction to walk in." And that was all. They walked. Aldous watched them go, this tall woman with her careful posture and the long habit of expecting people to disappoint her, and this quiet craftsman with his sore hand and his steady eyes, walking side by side down the lane that led toward the south end of the village where the forge sat. He thought about what he had just seen. Not the grip test. Not the declaration or the crowd or the arguments that were probably still being had in the alehouse even now. He thought about that one moment, Cale's voice, low and steady, saying, "Because giving up feels like agreeing with everyone who already decided I couldn't." He thought about how Maura's face had changed when she heard it. He thought about how two people could be standing on opposite sides of an iron bar, both of them holding on for the same reason, without ever knowing it about each other until one of them said it out loud. There was something important in that, Aldous thought. Something he did not have the right words for yet. Maybe the right words did not exist. Maybe some things were just like that, visible, clear, real, and they did not need to be named to matter. He picked up his tea. It was cold now, but he drank it anyway. Somewhere at the far end of the lane, Maura and Cale were still walking. And for the first time in 3 months, she was not thinking about who might step into the square tomorrow. She was thinking about something much smaller and much more important than that. She was thinking about what came next.